Chapter 2. Sometime after our original encounter, I found myself in a local park, in what had become all too common a scene in my life, the outer god Nyarlathotep, any number of infernal night gaunts, and some bizarre otherworldly apparatus by which my protector dispatched the Black Hunters. As the story continues, there are certain points I would like to make clear to the reader. The first would be that no matter how many times this scene took place, and no matter how much time I spent with the girl-like deity, by no means had I grown accustomed to these creatures. Every night gaunt still filled me with dread. Every moment I spent with the eons-old pharaoh assaulted me with uneasiness. Although I kept a stiff upper lip, a constant scream of madness in my head objected to all these unnerving events that I could only pacify with observation. Indeed, my protector would later remark that it thought my tolerance for such abnormalities had grown, but that was simply not true. The second thing I must admit is that by this time, I had realized how much I relied on my silver-haired, green-eyed companion. There was no doubt in my mind that these night gaunts either wanted to kill me or capture me for some unknown purpose, and it goes without saying that I had no means to defend myself. I would have long succumbed to their attempts had it not been for protection from the queerest source. Furthermore, it was to that source I could thank for whatever grip on sanity I still had. I had found that during every abnormal situation I experienced, the faceless god's minor, often irrelevant quips resounded in my head. Whether this was just a side effect of its passing interest in things, or it was by design to keep me from completely breaking, I do not know. This is a point that I could often reiterate, but will refrain from doing so as much as possible. It is my wish that the reader understands that only with the protection, incidental or not, of a being as great in power as Nyarlathotep can I relay this story today. After the aforementioned dispatching of a group of night gaunts, the tugging in my head bid me to pose a question to the triumphant thing. It had become very obvious to me that it was toying with these hunters, obliterating them in ways I would have preferred not to see. Why, then, had the outer god not simply found their source, or perhaps their master, and destroyed them all at once? With a smile and a deep voice unlike the sing-song piping it usually exercised, it pointed to the sky. As if on cue, as if it was waiting for me to come to that realization all along, the thing boldly announced the aligning of the stars, the waking of a dream, the revealing of a place lost to time that contained only terror. It was a place I again hesitate to name, as these are words one must not use without absolute purpose, but it seemed that I would find myself at this horrible place in too short a time, for time itself came to a halt as the sunken city rose from the depths. It was after that frightening scene that I found myself in the middle of the ocean. I say after relatively, as in reality it seemed as if no time had passed at all. The monochrome aura that came with the stoppage of the flow of time still oppressed my senses. The fake girl had summoned a creature to grant us passage to the remote city, a creature I had only heard of in the accounts of a dreadful New England town. As I stood on the back of what seemed to be a whale-like being, it told me that the thing was Dagon, that mighty fish-human god worshipped by the Philistines, and later the focus of the esoteric order of Dagon in Old Innsmouth. As we neared that ancient place, I noticed out of the corner of my eyes that other creatures, called guests by my otherworldly companion, had joined us, though I was intent on fixing my focus straight ahead. For at the bottom of my field of vision, I could vaguely recognize 4 shadows underneath Dagon, appendages that appeared to be 2 long arms and 2 long legs, though I did not dare to stare too long at these things to confirm the true nature of the fish god I stood on. It was shortly after we were joined by these other things that a large expanse came into view over the horizon. A muddy shoreline revealed a cyclopean city, towering structures that dominated the skyline, and a mass of both overbearing darkness and unseemly lights filled the void that looked like it stretched into the depths of the earth. As I have mentioned before, there are things that I am hesitant to state plainly, but I will make every attempt to describe this loathsome place and what I found inside it with the utmost detail. Though these things were not meant to be seen with human eyes, and only previously recorded through visions by the mad Arab Abdul al-Hazred, for the sake of authenticity I will relay my experiences as my memory will allow. It should be said now that the outer god and I were ferried by Dagon to the millennia-old corpse city R'lyeh itself. The inside of R'lyeh was a vast city, filled with horrifying structures, spheres and cylinders, and even floor surfacing in an oppressive atmosphere. The materials that the dead city was composed of seemed like a stone no geologist would be familiar with, a sleek black rock material that clearly felt otherworldly, phosphorus essences that shone brightly, and ornate carvings on many surfaces. Non-Euclidean geometry dominated the construction style, awful shapes that offended me, terrible masonry that could drive men mad by a simple gaze. Worse, it seemed as if some of the buildings simply floated above the ground, bizarre unfinished spires and orbs that either sat in the air through some horrible method or perhaps merely connected to the rest of the city in some way my senses could not interpret. These buildings were operational in some sense, as they clearly aroused the guests my companion had spoken of earlier, as they too were unavoidable in this great place. The things I saw inside really were not confirmed to me by the silver-haired figure, so there were many things I saw which I am unsure of. Others I knew, whether through accounts of people who shared similar stories to mine, or through my unfortunate experience with that cursed Necronomicon. I saw brown-bodied crustacean-like creatures with heads of yellow-green fungi, which I knew to be the Mygo from Yuggoth as described to me by a professor from a Scatonic university. And there undoubtedly were elder things, barrel-bodied things with 5-pointed starfish for heads, discovered by the unfortunate Antarctic expedition of William Dyer. The fish-like deep ones appeared, out of the depths of the ocean cities to join this grotesque gathering. Amorphous purple blobs dotted the crowd, surely the nefarious Shoggoths. There were winged Baiki, servants of the king in yellow, the furred Vormes, servants of the toad-like great Alt One, even the star spawn that arrived on this planet eons ago with the supposed true inhabitant of this blasphemous city. For what purpose all these things had gathered I cannot say. The deity that took me here made it seem like the rising of this horrible place was an event for these things to behold, and these awful creatures were merely guests. What terrible events they attended for, what attractions called all these things here, I did not want to know, but knew was unavoidable. The mass of creatures combined to create a foul stench. They spoke in unintelligible guttural languages. Wings, tentacles, claws, and other inhuman body parts affronted my sight. They paraded and congregated in ways that no human cultic ritual could possibly emulate. And there I stood, the lone human in a sea of insanity, clutching onto the musical inanities of that supposed girl as she tried to direct my attention here and there. It is my hope that the reader excuses this incomplete description of that night at Rillier. Surely there were more creatures, new species previously never encountered. Perhaps those pterodactyl-like things or maybe the gelatinous sentient sacks have not yet been named. I did not dare to mentally record each and every being I saw, and I was somewhat relieved when that whimsical god tore me from the throng of things. As we ventured deeper into the corpse city, the darkness thickened and the crowd of off-world species disappeared, and the oppressive atmosphere somewhat released me from its grip. Still we pressed further to find the false god who, for whatever reason, was after me, though I detested the idea of meeting something that desired mayhem could make its abode in this awful place. As I considered that possibility, the outer god called for my attention to hand me an object. The object it handed me was a small black box, resembling some sort of container. It was constructed of a black rock-like material, not unlike the stone in the masonry around us, obviously otherworldly. Strange red markings adorned it in curious patterns and glowed with a faint red light. When I inquired about the object, the thing would not give me a straight answer on its use, avoiding my questions with its usual mockery. It insisted that it would protect me, though, so I hesitantly stuffed it in my pocket, already exhausted at examining it. We continued our journey through the city, which seemed to stretch on far longer than the island we viewed would allow. My companion tried to explain to me what sort of space-time manipulations were at work, but I did not try to comprehend the explanation. Finally, we reached what seemed to be our destination, as a booming voice and bright lights brought us to a stop. Out of the darkness came an old man, appearing as an old human but with a powerful-looking body. Long grey hair sat atop his head and adorned his face in a long, flowing beard. He carried a staff that glowed a bright gold, and I knew immediately we were approached by the elder god Nodens. I should have come to this conclusion earlier, for Nodens was indeed served by the night gaunts, and acted as a hunter in opposition to the servants and minions of beings such as the deity I stood alongside. Why the thing took the form of that hoary old man was a mystery, but despite that form I could sense both great power and a choking uneasiness. It seemed that Nodens intended to challenge Nyarlathotep, but before that, with a flash of light it was revealed we were standing in the middle of an arena, some sort of abominable coliseum with a massive audience of otherworldly creatures. I do not know how I did not immediately fall to my knees at the sight of the crowd, how I did not cry in agony, or how I did not vomit in disgust. Perhaps it was the influence of Nyarlathotep, perhaps some sort of protection afforded to me by the black trinket in my pocket, or perhaps I was already long mad without realizing it. Despite my fear, I heard clearly the exchange between the hunter and the pharaoh, and noted the confidence in which my protector accepted the challenge. Indeed, for an outer god whose true throne was at the center of the cosmos, even the elder god and this mass of writhing creatures posed little threat. But that wizened old hunter motioned to a figure behind him and identified it as the true opponent of the crawling chaos, a being that took the form of a young girl who seemed to be aflame. For the first time I could sense some trepidation in my companion. The air suddenly boiled with an intense heat at the announcement of this girl-like figure. As it emerged from the darkness, I could make out the details of this thing: long red hair tied up by ribbons of fire, eyes that burned a deep red, and a body covered in red markings that seemed to mirror a flame. An inferno erupted around it, though it seemed as if the flames were a part of the being itself. In my mind's eye I could see it clearly. Her true form forced itself upon me in a flash of vision that I wish I hadn't seen. Though this thing, like my companion, took the form of a girl for some unknown reasons, it clearly was something else. Instead I saw it as a ball of fire, massive in size and not unlike a star. This fake star, with great columns of flame dancing on its surface, with black sunspots floating here and there, was undoubtedly alive. This was the identity of the thing that approached us. This was the living flame, the great old one Sithigio. As I mentioned, it was the first time since I had met it that the silver-haired creature exhibited some hesitation. It stated that it had crossed paths with the flame spirit in front of us, forming a rivalry with the thing in some sort of space-exclusive school. The fiery being made for the outer god, with a step at first, but before I knew it, as if she had moved faster than my eyes could detect, or perhaps through a dimension I could not perceive, she clutched my protector by the collar and effortlessly lifted her off the ground. Before the fight could advance any further, a sphere of black light surrounded them, a sphere apparently summoned by the hunter Nodens as he explained they would fight where no one could witness. And with that, they disappeared, and I was left alone, in the center of a ring with a being I could not fully comprehend, surrounded by the disgusting whooping, howling, grunting, and bellowing of the grotesque sea of creatures. With the outer god gone, the hoary figure turned its attention to me. If my companion was right, then I was the target of this great hunter, and in this situation there could be no escape. I was soon restrained, not by the powerful arms of the figure before me, nor by some object or apparatus, but by simple hair. The long grey beard and the face of the hunter gripped me tightly, as if it were some sort of appendage, and lifted me off my feet. Oh, how I wish I could be wrong, how I wish these normally indifferent beings hadn't set their sights on me, and most importantly, how I wish I could hope for something other than rescue from the malignant god Nyarlathotep itself. Please forgive me, humanity, as I gripped that black object in my pocket with all my strength. Though I did not know the consequence, though I was perfectly aware of the horrors it might unleash, I opened that black and red box with a wish for survival. Out of that black box sprang some creature, something I had never seen before, but felt a familiar oppressive presence. As the armored thing, far larger than the black instrument it flew out of, landed on the arena floor, it called to me in the same sing-song voice of the silver-haired girl. The outer god had donned some sort of combative suit, though the mockery was not lost on me as it resembled a form of armor used in certain entertainment programs in the East. Upon its arrival, the massive crowd of evil things instantly vanished, apparently fleeing from the sight of my protector. And with the top of its hand, as if the hair tentacle appendage that nearly crushed me was of no concern, the beard protruding from Nodens was severed from his face, and I was released. Nodens erupted with anger, but was quieted by the declaration of the defeat of that fiery monster, and I shuddered at the thought of what must have taken place within that black sphere. Nodens instantly recoiled in its position. The aura of a powerful hunter now shrunk to an old man. It tried to make an exit from the arena, shying away from the faceless mask worn by the victorious outer god in retreat. When that god questioned Nodens on its motive, its answer was shocking. I was to be made into some sort of intergalactic entertainer, an actor in some horrific show suitable for that frenzied mass of otherworldly things that had crowded the Colosseum. I recalled the account of William Dyer, who described the mural depictions of an ancient, pre-human creature that was used for entertainment and occasionally freed by the elder things. The horror of being used in a similar fashion dizzied me so that I could not even protest as my protector carried me in its arms. And as Nyarlathotep unleashed some infernal attack that filled my senses with a great white light, I'm ashamed to say that I felt some relief as the hunter which accosted me so disappeared. It may appear to the reader that this is the end of a horrible tale, and indeed it seems so to me as the silver-haired girl returned us to the park where it announced the beginning of this whole ordeal. There's one more note to this story, however, that I must recite. The final chapter filled me with a terror just as strong, if not stronger, than the sight of that dead city, the inhuman creatures inside, the hunter Nodens and the burning one itself. This final chapter begins with an ending. As we both stood in the park, the outer god played the part of a young girl, bidding a heartfelt goodbye to someone she could not reach. I admit I reciprocated the goodbye with a pang of regret, and allowed that gravity that the thing usually carried with it to recede, for although I always brace myself knowing its true nature, it is true that I owed it my life and in all likelihood my sanity. And yet as I returned home to the same musical pipade of a greeting, to the same sight of a silver-haired girl, to the same flirtatiousness, clinginess, whimsical quips and subtle mockery, I knew I was trapped. Trapped by Nyarlathotep, a being of capabilities I could not imagine, for reasons I did now know, for however long it felt interested. And as long as it was here, others would be attracted, beings ranging from frightening fungal creatures and amorphous blobs to the great old ones themselves. Please understand, dear reader, that my outward steeled appearance since the arrival of this thing belied the constant maddening terror I felt, the constant scream inside my head I heard, and the constant oppressiveness that gripped me at all times. End of chapter.